State troopers are investigating a deadly home invasion.
And KSB says the two who died were not victims, and the shooter was younger than 18.
Would you look at that? A juvenile using a gun to protect himself or themselves. You see, lately there's been this debate about whether 18-year-olds should be allowed to own guns. People keep saying they shouldn't, but I've always said if you're old enough to take on adult responsibilities, like raising a family, you should have the ability to protect yourself. And this right here proves exactly why.
Two men broke into a home with plans to steal firearms from a safe. They were met by an armed juvenile. At around 4:30 Saturday, the Manchester Police Department responded to a house in the city of Manchester. There they determined the two men had forced their way into the house. The juvenile resident of the home found the intruders holding firearms and allegedly acted in self-defense, shooting the two men before escaping through a bedroom window. The two men were later identified as Roger Smith of McKee and Jeffrey Allen of Manchester. Both have since died.
This isn't even about an 18-year-old. This is a juvenile, someone younger than that, who used a gun to protect themselves. Two grown men broke into the house armed, looking to steal guns. The kids shot them both and got out through the bedroom window. Now those two men are dead. And this is exactly why it matters. This is the perfect example of what happens when kids are taught firearm responsibility instead of being taught to fear guns. These kids took on two adult men with guns by themselves. If that's not equality, I don't know what is. This is exactly why a gun is called the great equalizer. It doesn't matter how strong you are, how big you are, or how many people are against you. A gun balances the fight. And yet, people don't want kids learning how to use firearms safely. The operative word being safely. They freak out when they hear about parents taking their kids shooting or teaching them gun safety. But here's the thing. I don't have kids, but every kid I've ever met who was raised around guns the right way is usually exceptionally well behaved. Why? Because they understand responsibility. It's bigger than just knowing how to shoot. Teaching kids about guns teaches them about life. It shows them that actions have consequences. It shows them that something as small as pulling a trigger can mean the difference between life and death. And that sticks with them. Speaking of self-defense, let's talk about what happens after you use your gun. Because here's the reality. Even if you're 100% justified, you could still be facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. Take Millie Mills, a 67-year-old grandmother from Compton, California. She was attacked, pursued, and cornered by a group of men. She fired her gun in self-defense, and then she got arrested.
The amount of money to defend me, over $500,000. I don't have that.
$500,000 to a 67-year-old great-grandmother living in Compton, California. The significance of that. Where would she be right now? She leaves and she doesn't come back that evening.
A large white car swerved across the front of me.
This same vehicle now bumps into the backside of her car.
I was terrified.
An individual appears at her window.
Right at my window.
He puts his hands inside of her car.
I was scared for my life.
She has no other option at this point.
Took the gun out and I leaned back and I fired it.
$500,000. Think about that. Would you have that kind of money just sitting around? Most people don't. And that's where the USCCA comes in. Millie had legal protection through USCCA, and they covered her entire defense. Her attorney was at her side within hours, and that's not just some one-time thing. This is what the USCCA does. If you ever have to use your firearm in self-defense, they help you find an attorney, post bail, and fight your case.
I have to take my shoes off and go to a cell. I was in the cell probably about maybe an hour. And they said, your attorney says you're going to be bailed out as soon as we know the bail amount. The bail that was put on me was for $50,000. So I had $2,000 cash at my house, but I didn't have $5,000, which is what it would have costed me to bail out. The system went down for about 2.5, 3 hours. So the bail amount didn't come up to them for several hours. But as soon as it came up, then the insurance company had provided the bail bondsman with the money. They just bailed me right out. And they billed me $0.
You don't want to be in a position where you're forced to take a bad plea deal just because you can't afford to fight back. I always say, carrying a gun is just one part of self-defense. Knowing what to do after is just as important. So if you're serious about protecting yourself and your rights, check out USCCA. Click the link in the description section and become a member today. And even if you don't go with USCCA, get something, because something is going to be better than nothing. Now think about it. What else do kids interact with daily that can take a life? They see violence all the time in movies, video games, and music, but it's always fake. They don't see the real impact, but when a kid learns about a firearm the right way, they learn that it's serious. They learn that it's not a toy. But when kids don't learn about firearms responsibly, what happens? They only see guns being used in violent movies and video games and news. They never see guns being used to protect life, only to take it. So when they get angry or emotional, the only time they've ever seen a gun used is when someone was shooting up a school or committing a crime. What do you think they'll associate guns with? Now compare that to a kid raised in a home where guns are treated with respect, where they learn gun safety, where they understand that a gun can protect life just as much as it can take it. That changes everything. Now, do you think this story is going to be all over the national news? Probably not. But if this same kid had done something reckless with a gun, you know his face would be everywhere, because the media doesn't want to highlight stories where guns save lives. They only push stories where guns are used in crimes. But this right here, this proves why responsible gun ownership matters. These kids were in a position to protect themselves. If they weren't, if they didn't have that gun, if they didn't know how to use it, those kids might not be here today. So the next time someone argues that 18-year-olds shouldn't own guns, show them this video, because this right here is proof that when someone, no matter how young, is put in an adult situation, they need the means to defend themselves. Guns aren't just for criminals, they're for everyone who refuses to be a victim. And if you carry a gun, or you're thinking about carrying, there are 7 things you need to do before you leave the house armed. Because carrying a gun isn't just a right, it's a responsibility. And if you don't take these steps, you're setting yourself up for failure. So, if you're serious about protecting yourself and doing it the right way, check out my video on the 7 things to do before carrying a gun. Click the link in the description section or click the pop-up that pops up here somewhere, and I'll see you there.